Well, you've been hearing it all morning. It is tax day, and you know that for sure. Big names like Willie Nelson, Dionne Warwick, O.J. Simpson, the comedian known as Sinbad, just a few of the rich and famous being nailed by the IRS for tax evasion. Now, many live in multi-million-dollar homes, but they are a huge part of the $6.5 billion of unpaid taxes in California. And Hollywood tax attorney Dennis Brager joins us on the KSRO Live Line. Mr. Brager, good morning.
Good morning.
So how can all these rich guys with lots of money get away with not paying their taxes?
Well, they all have a different story, I suppose. O.J. Simpson, for example, it's been reported that he owes $1.5 million to the state of California. But he managed to move to Florida. In general, he's out of the reach of the California tax collectors. Plus, the Goldman family, as you recall, sued him and won a judgment against him for the death of Ron Goldman. And according to public records, it appears that they're in line ahead of the California income tax collector.
But he hasn't paid either one, right?
Well, I guess the Goldmans have been grabbing little bits and pieces here and there. And then there's the case of Ron Isley. He actually went to jail for not paying his taxes. So they do catch up with some of the rich and famous.
Is it easier to get away with not paying your taxes to the state or to the feds?
Well, in California, the franchise tax board is pretty tough on our homegrown tax delinquents. Most people would rather owe money to the IRS than the franchise tax board. And the first thing I tell my clients if they owe both is, let's get rid of the state and then we'll worry about the IRS.
Now, are you brought in cases where they're trying to avoid paying their taxes, or where they acknowledge that they have the obligation, or just looking for a process to kind of get this behind them?
Well, we handle both kind of cases. Some of our clients don't believe they owe the taxes, and we do what we can to get to the bottom of it, and if they don't owe it, we work on straightening that out. Some of our clients acknowledge they owe the taxes but need more time. Some have been through difficult divorces. They're paying ex-wives and husbands alimony, and they may have had business reversals, so they just need some more time to work things out. In
California in particular, how much time do they get? Do they get years and years to work this out and eventually have to pay?
Well, first of all, California has 20 years to collect. And while they're collecting, interest and penalties keep running, so it's not a free ride. And it sort of depends upon everybody's individual financial situation. Sometimes California wants to be paid back in less than a year. Other times there are payment agreements that stretch out 5 years or more.
And at what point do these unpaid taxes become, quote, uncollectible?
Well, uncollectible, as used by California, is really a term of art, and it just means at the moment they can't figure out how to collect the money. It doesn't become truly uncollectible for at least 20 years, which is the California statute of limitations.
So in theory, they could actually delay paying these taxes for as long as 20 years and then pay, but at that point they would owe all of their taxes and a whole ton of late fees and such.
Yeah, you can figure that every 5 to 7 years, the number doubles. So it gets pretty expensive not to pay the state or the IRS.
And let me just ask you a final question about the list that comes out, because California in particular in the last several years has sort of routinely put out a list of people who have high visibility, big names, famous people quite often, and how much they owe in terms of back taxes. I assume they put that list out to pressure these people to pay up. Does it work?
Yeah, it really does. Apparently, Dionne Warwick was on that list, and after an article came out, she apparently made some arrangements with the state to make payment arrangements, so her name came off of it. So it absolutely does work.
Okay, and now that we're looking at today's deadline, suppose you're one of these big names with multi-million-dollar obligations. The deadline, April 15th, is now. If you can't pay it, you just simply file for an extension like anyone else?
You file for an extension, you're still going to pay interest and penalties, but if you don't file the return on time, you start ticking away at penalties that run at 5% a month and go to 25% for filing your return late. So
very interesting.
Even if you can't afford to pay it, get that tax return filed, get that extension filed.
Even if you're not rich, I guess, huh?
Rich or poor.
It makes sense. Dennis Brager, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for the insights.
Thank you.
We appreciate you joining us today. Hollywood tax attorney Dennis Brager.